We live in a time where most everything in politics is about perception. The actual facts on the ground are often less important than the way we feel about the world as filtered through our media ecosystem and respective echo chambers. And so in 2024, crime was this big issue. But this was for almost no reason, right? If you look at the crime data, we have various data on crime. Crime is down significantly since the 90s. You know, as Nickelback would say, look at this graph. In each case, significantly less crime. We could attribute the misperceptions about crime to the anti-immigration rhetoric from the Republicans, Trump specifically calling a lot of crime migrant crime. But I have another theory of the case, an additional fear that I think has fueled this idea that crime is simply at unprecedented levels when in fact it's the opposite. So let's look at the cities that ICE and the National Guard have targeted. In the case of DC, the president said the reason for mobilizing the National Guard was because of the violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs, and homeless people. We'll circle back to that. It's interesting because at the beginning of this year, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia issued a press release that said, quote, total violent crime for 2024 in the District of Columbia is down 35% from 2023 and is the lowest it has been in over 30 years. Same thing with LA and Chicago. Of course, in the 90s, we had high crime, but they're at record lows now. So, like, what gives? So here's what I'm thinking. I think it's not only the migrant crime rhetoric. I mean, when you look at studies, it's also the case that migrants commit less crime than Americans who are born here. But it's also, in my opinion, a prejudiced response to a real problem in America today, which is homelessness. While crime has gone down, 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 homelessness has skyrocketed in the United States. So what if it's not that people think that crime is at an all-time high because violent crime is happening with more frequency? It's not. It's that they're seeing more homeless people on the street every day, and therefore they believe that there's more criminal activity in their city. Homeless people are severely stigmatized, according to NYU social work professor Deborah Paget. Homeless people are more likely to be perceived as dangerous and criminal when in fact they're more likely to be the victims of crime. Also, their behavior is criminalized, like loitering laws are often created to, push homeless people out of certain spaces. From ABC, in Los Angeles, unhoused people were the suspects in 11% of homicides. The report said they were victims of 23% of homicides. Around 14 to 21% of unhoused people are estimated to have been a victim of violence, compared with around 2% of the general population. To make my case about this in our present political context, I want to show you a clip from Barry Weiss's podcast, Honestly. So if you don't know Weiss, she's one of these previously liberal commentators who now mainly panders to right-wingers with her online publication, The Free Press, which she founded after leaving the liberal cesspool, the New York Times. In the Trump era, she's now the editor-in-chief of CBS, so I guess suffice to say the grifting worked out for her. She was previously quite democratic because she's Jewish and gay, like she's in a gay marriage. But then wokeism and pro-Palestine activism went too far. I mean, this is a stereotypical right-wing conversion story. We don't need to get into further details, but suffice to say, I feel like Barry Weiss has been fully conspiracized and brain-rotted about this surge in crime, and she has a really dismissive attitude towards homeless people. In her interview with Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, I'm just gonna never beat the Ezra Klein fangirl allegations. I don't know how. Weiss acts like she wants to agree with a lot of the Democratic politics that she used to stand for, but she keeps circling back to like this, but my neighborhood doesn't feel safe anymore kind of thing, which is almost off topic of what Klein and Thompson are talking about, and it doesn't match the data that we have about crime.
Whether it was in LA or San Francisco or New York or a lot of the places that went right, I don't want to say gave Donald Trump the election, but moved right decisively in the last election, or found themselves moving to cities that they didn't really want to live in as much, Austin, Miami. They're making a good life for themselves, and they're basically like, it's not worth it. The crime is not worth it. The homelessness is not worth it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
So
you can.
when you're saying the sort of free press people, right? Not on the disorder side, right? I think I have a sense of your politics there. But what would, if you began hearing like a Democrat running for governor of New York, what would they need to say for you to think on the supply side, on affordability, something is going to be different here? What would buy credibility to you?
Here's what I would need to hear. Make crime illegal again.
But that you just went to the disorder side.
And so for me, Ezra, what I'm looking for is so basic. Make people safe, clean up the streets, make it so that women are not scared to go on the subway on any stop alone at night in New York City. That's like, I'm at the basement level. I don't need a vision of utopia. I would be happy just with safe. Once we have that, then you can sell me on abundance.
Clean up the streets. How do we do that, Barry Weiss? How does that get done? Is policy supposed to be about protecting you and the upper class from those less fortunate than you, protecting your feelings? Or should policy be about protecting people who have to live on the streets and fight for their lives every day? Just a question I have. Nowhere in this interview does she give a shit about the plight of the homeless or mentally ill populations, or even ponder why is it that she's seeing more homeless people on the street. But do you guys want to know? Because I can tell you. And it's not because homeless people are inherently inferior or becoming lazier. Most of it simply has to do with the fact that housing is too expensive and there isn't enough of it. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the cause of our present homelessness crisis is because there isn't enough deeply affordable housing development and preservation. There are inadequate rental assistance programs, low income issues, and weak safety nets, the end of COVID-19 relief funds, and discriminatory practices towards low-income people. Basically, one big answer to Weiss's concerns is abundance. But in the interview, she acts like harsher policing is what's going to magically solve her safety concerns. And she acts like Klein and Thompson don't have a solution, but they actually do have a solution in advocating for a drastic increase in our national housing stock. If you, Barry Weiss, hate homeless people so much, what would actually solve your safety concerns is backing affordable housing development in your neighborhood and across the country. Also, supporting funding for social services for homeless people, which, shocker, is being severely upended in the Trump era. On November 12th, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration was rolling back HUD's Housing First policies by the end of 2025, directing $3.9 billion in homelessness funds away from Housing First to programs that prioritize work and drug treatment. And experts estimate that 170,000 people may be made homeless because of this change. Can we say we're surprised at this point? No, and maybe it's presumptuous of me to assume that you, the viewer, can take any more of this year of constantly bad news, but this is happening and will have real world consequences. So there's a debate within the housing policy circles about what the best approach is to addressing homelessness. And one approach is this crazy idea, which is to just give people housing, either temporary housing or permanent supportive housing. That's housing first. The other approach, which the Trump administration is interested in pursuing, is to focus on getting homeless people working and in drug rehab if they need it. This is the treatment first approach. So let's read from the NYT article for a bit. Housing First programs provide subsidized apartments without preconditions to the homeless with disabilities, offering but not requiring treatment for mental health or addiction. Supporters say that the programs save lives by getting troubled people off the street, and that the housing stability prepares them to address other issues. But the housing is expensive and hard to build amid local resistance, leaving many people waiting on the street. Critics say that free housing provides an incentive for irresponsible behavior. The treatment first approach, embodied by Mr. Trump's plan, pledges swifter action to address what it calls the root causes of homelessness, like drug abuse and mental illness. But it risks consigning to worse destitution and danger those who cannot or do not comply. It also does not address another root cause of homelessness, soaring housing costs. In a systematic review of 26 studies in the US and Canada, researchers found that the Housing First approach decreased homelessness and improved housing stability more than the Treatment First approach. So, by this point, most housing policy experts have agreed that Housing First is preferable and that this move by the Trump administration is a big mistake that will worsen homelessness in a what is already a crisis. Are we surprised? Again, we are hardly surprised. HUD's website still has a page about why housing first policy works and is even like more cost effective in the long run. So we'll see how long that stays online before they delete it. But there they write, several studies have found that compared with the treatment first model, housing first approaches offer greater long-term housing stability, especially among people experiencing chronic homelessness. Some studies have found that housing first programs may also reduce costs by shortening stays in hospitals, residential substance abuse programs, nursing homes, and prisons. Research also suggests that housing first programs successfully house people with intersecting vulnerabilities, such as veterans and people with a history of substance abuse, mental illness challenges, domestic violence, and chronic medical conditions such as HIV/AIDS. So I want to circle back to that Trump quote now about the National Guard in DC, because notice how homeless people are just sort of tacked on the end of that long list of criminal and dangerous character descriptions. I think this sort of fits my theory here that the reason people think crime is on the rise is because they associate homelessness, people on the street, with crime, when homelessness is actually a housing policy failure that we could fix if people supported affordable housing production in their cities. Did you get that, Barry Weiss? But all the rhetoric about this, especially from the right, demonizes homelessness and blames homeless people for their situation, which in a housing crisis, in a homelessness crisis, it's just not true. They are not to blame for the circumstances that we as a society have put them in. What is even the point of having work requirements? We have a pretty low unemployment rate as it goes, yet homelessness is through the roof, so it really doesn't have to do with mass unemployment. It's not that there are just more like lazy people milling about. It's that they can't access housing in this economy. There was this insane article from April that talked about how some NYC homeless shelters, half of the people staying there work full time, but they just cannot afford housing in New York anymore. So I guess we'll see what happens with Mamdani's housing policy, but nationally it's pretty depressing that a lot of cities have decided to address their own homelessness problems by implementing more anti-homeless policies. They don't want to help people, they just want to push them out of public life entirely to make the rest of us, middle and upper class people, feel safer. Musician Hayley Williams actually talked about this in her new song True Believer, which is like a banger about Nashville gentrification, where she sings, "They put up chain link fences underneath the biggest bridges. They pose in Christmas cards with guns as big as all their children." You know, we've all seen anti-homeless architecture with the spikes and the benches that you're not able to lay down on because there's like a handle in the middle. But a lot of times these municipalities will put up fences under bridges or other places that homeless people tend to congregate away from the general population, I might add, but they're not even allowed to like do that, I guess. It's clear to me at least that these cities would like rather feed into prejudices against homeless people than to create a policy that actually will solve these problems. And unfortunately, it's also like a democratic problem. In my college town where I go to grad school, Champaign, Illinois, the Strides Homeless Shelter has been operating on funds from COVID that are set to expire by the end of the year. So what the city did in response was to put homeless shelter funding on the ballot. In April, residents voted on whether they wanted to increase their taxes to ensure the shelter's continued operation. And you're never gonna guess what happened next. Yeah, people do not want to help homeless people, but they do want to complain about homeless people. And they don't want new affordable housing in their neighborhood, right? You know, it's like there are more housed people than unhoused people. So when it's put to a vote, I don't know, people don't have a heart to support this marginalized population. It's really sad. And I kind of feel that with everything in politics right now, it's going to get worse before it gets better. In the meantime, people might continue to perceive crime as getting worse, even though they're just seeing like more homeless people on the street hurting nobody. Most homeless people like do not want to get into shit because they could get killed over a bad altercation. Us housed people are usually going to be fine. So all this is to say that the crime fear-mongering persists because of stereotypes not only of immigrant populations, but I also think it's because of ever-growing homeless populations that people see and associate with danger, even though the threat is like pretty darn low. I want to implore to you that homelessness is not a crime, okay? We are in a low crime, high homelessness situation as a nation, and it's important that we disentangle those things instead of taking the approach of Weiss or Trump in inflating homelessness with crime. That is a kind of prejudice and hatred towards people who have little control over their circumstances and deserve more of our support. Because at the end of the day, whether you hate homeless people and don't want to see them in your community, or you care about homeless people and want them to be safe and secure, you actually both want the same outcome in the end. Greater housing affordability, financial support for homeless shelters, and a housing first policy approach that allows homeless people to get off the streets and into homes of their own. It is the most effective approach to addressing the issues we're seeing in cities in a way that also continues to uphold people's basic dignity.